All right, we'll count her down. You ready? In 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Turn the Lens with Jeff Frick. We're excited to have you today, and we're excited to have a guest back who's actually been on a few times. But I was looking at the calendar, it's been years and years, literally. So we're excited to welcome in all the way from Iowa. He's Bill Schmarzo. You know him as the Dean of Big Data, but his official title is Customer Data Innovation Lead for Dell Technologies. Bill, great to see you.
Has it really been that long, Jeff?
I looked. It was the very, very beginning of 2021. So we were kind of coming out of the 2020 COVID year, still kind of in it. I think vaccinations were kind of early light on some vaccination activity in terms of development. So yeah, it's been a long time. Wow, how the world changes in 2 years.
That is so true, isn't it?
It is. And you know, it's interesting, just to kick it off, there was a piece of research that came out, I saw yesterday, from Pew. And they asked people, what is their awareness of the AI in their lives? And there were 6 kind of categories that they queried people about: the fitness tracker, chatbots, product recommendation engines, music recommendation engines, an alert on a security camera like a Nest that it actually does something if it sees somebody. And then the last one was email, spam filters. And it was not high. The awareness of the AI in their lives today, is not high. So, it's really interesting to then contrast that with, say, ChatGPT, which, is one of these catalyst media events that really drives, kind of a mass, I don't know if knowledge is the right word, but awareness of these things. As you think back, time moves fast. What does go through your head?
It's interesting that you say that, Jeff. So I've been back in Des Moines now about 8 or 9 months, I guess. And I was very fortunate in the first 6 weeks I was back. I was invited to this Central Iowa Crossroads event. And the idea behind this Crossroads event was to get 100 plus people from different senior level positions across corporations and government and, nonprofits and et cetera, and bring them together and to brainstorm the impact that each of these trends would have on Iowa across 45 different variables. And some of them were like, clean water and green energy and the aging of America. And they were all, it was interesting to see where people put these things from a perspective of real value. I mean, what's happening today and impact on Iowa. So that was kind of the criteria, right? Mm-hmm. The classic 2x2 was, is it real? And what kind of impact does it have on Iowa? Here's a surprising point for me. Less than 12% of the people in that room, senior executives, had it in the upper right-hand corner. They either didn't think it was real or they didn't think it was going to have an impact on Iowa. And I was like, I asked at my table, I said, how many people here use the GPS to get here? Well, a lot of people raised their hands. I said, really? Okay. How many people use Netflix or Spotify or it was just, a level of awareness it struck me as being, first off, people aren't aware and they don't think it's going to be relevant for their professions. And
even though they're using it every day, right? Even though it's part of their every day.
Every day they're helping them make better decisions. And it's just, and maybe the good news with ChatGPT is, like you said, it raises awareness that this thing's kind of around us.
Right.
But it's just like, if you're not aware of it, then how can you think about where and how can I use this in other places to be more effective, to be more relevant, et cetera? So yeah, the level of awareness of AI in our country, especially when you get away from like Silicon Valley, it's shockingly low.
Right. Well, you jumped ahead a little bit, but I had on one of my bullet points, since you have moved away from Palo Alto, you're back in Iowa and you used to fly over countries to teach all the time. And, you've spent a lot of time in factories and actually in flyover country before COVID. So COVID hits, everybody stops. Now you've moved back to the Midwest and you can actually travel again and your teaching is picking up again. So again, maybe you answered it, but more specifically kind of the context and the feel of technology in Iowa versus sitting in Palo Alto and kind of the reality of where it sits and how it's impacting people or how they think it's impacting them versus when you're sitting here in Palo Alto and, you're just, you're kind of right on the bleeding edge.
It's interesting, Jeff, because I've within a 12-month span, I've seen both extremes. And I don't want to pick on Iowa too much, because there are organizations here who are making use of it. John Deere is doing a lot of stuff around autonomous tractors and such. So it isn't like it's devoid. But in Palo Alto and in Silicon Valley, everybody talks about it. It's like you hang around the Starbucks and you hear 3 or 4 different people brainstorm with somebody else about their latest AI-based product they're going to build. It's kind of striking. And to be honest, Jeff, this was part of the motivation to move back, because I thought, like, this is a chance for me to go do something. If this is my last rodeo, then by golly, I'm going to make it something that I really, really want to do. And so part of that was coming back here and trying to figure out what can I do? I mean, I've got a lot of stuff I can share and give back, but what can I do to raise the awareness, not only of AI within the state of Iowa, but also help people understand, educate them about where and how to apply it to really drive meaningful value.
Right, right. Well, the other thing that I want to talk about that's changed since last we spoke, and I think it'll change again tomorrow, and that's kind of the compression, if you will, it seems like, of cycles, the velocity and kind of the amplitude. So it seems just like the amplitude of the curves is getting higher. The compression between cycles is getting higher in terms of this ongoing change, and whether that's the weather, whether that's finance, whether that's banking, whether that's education, seems like you can apply that to a lot of things. So that, and today's the slowest day that technology will ever move for the rest of our lives, right? So it's really kind of, we continue to just speed this cycle, and people need to be using these tools to help them, keep up.
So very, very interesting point there, Jeff, because the cycles are speeding across so many different dimensions. It's not just technology, it's society, it's culture, right. It's environmental, it's political. There's all these different dimensions of our society that are all operating at a much higher frequency than before. And we primarily, many of us come from sort of a traditional command and control structure, where you wait for somebody at the top to make a decision, and then we all sort of act on it. So a decision, then we wait, sort of a batch-centric world.
Right.
We're making batch-based decisions in a real-time world of dynamic changes. And there needs to be a shift in the mindset of literally everybody about how do we think about what's going on in our society. I can't wait for somebody else to make the decision. Maybe I have to make the decision. Maybe I need to own making that decision with respect to things that are important to me, whether it be on, how I make financial investments, or where I go to college, or what jobs I take. It's just, as you said, it's like in turmoil, and we are not trained. Our education system does not train us for that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And let's transition, right? Because society tries to catch up, government tries to catch up, regs try to catch up. And one of the things we've talked about it before, is kind of the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. And I know you want to talk about the ethical concerns, and we're going to get into that. But, I printed this out and I read this thing, and it's beautiful, but it almost seems nonsensical in terms of for instance, to know that there's AI. There you go. That's why I pull it up, that there's AI in the recommendation that you're currently receiving. I mean, we just talked about the fact that people don't understand that their Google Maps is powered by AI. I mean, something as simple as that seems pretty crazy. And we even got it into explainable AI. What are the factors? And it's super complicated math, and it's training all the time, and it's changing from day to day based on new inputs and outputs. When you think about the data privacy and data Bill of Rights, and trying to get control on, kind of law of unintended consequences, and what are people using that data for after the project that it was originally assembled for. I mean, there's a real lot of challenges that we're kind of probably lagging in terms of being able to deal with them.
Well, I think the AI Bill of Rights Jeff, is a great example. I mean, this is really, I think it's great if somebody puts something out there.
Yeah.
But it's not actionable, right? You read this, it's like, okay, there's no action to it. There's, how do I measure? How do I monitor? How do I manage? How do I optimize? So you have this sort of very highfalutin AI Bill of Rights, and I don't mean to diss on it, because it's a starting point, right?
Right.
But it's insufficient when we start thinking about how are we going to manage, monitor, optimize AI to make certain it's doing what we need it to do. And so if this was me, what I would be doing is figuring out what are the KPIs and metrics across a wide, diverse set of stakeholders that we need to start enforcing or monitoring and measuring in order to make sure our AI models are considering all these different variables. We know if you're a social media site and you optimize on clicks, likes, and share, you're going to get confirmation bias, very severe confirmation bias. Well, if you're optimizing on financial metrics, which by the way tend to be lagging indicators anyway, you're going to end up with all kinds of crazy crap. So there needs to be a level of not just awareness, but a commitment to take this AI Bill of Rights down to an actionable level, to start thinking about, well, what are the measures and variables and metrics around which we as a society think are important?
Right.
I wrote this, I think I told you, we talked about this 3-part blog I wrote on the economics of ethics. Now, I'll tell you right now that blog is probably, insufficient, probably wrong, it needs a lot of help. But the bottom line is if we don't understand how to measure and codify ethics and put that into our AI models, we're going to end up with all kinds of unintended consequences from our AI models. And so we've got to start as a society having those kinds of conversations, knowing that the answers are not going to be easy and they're not going to be perfect. And we're going to have to sort of, as a society, slug our way through this.
Right. I wonder, I want to get your experience from going through projects with customers, because two of the things that are really important as part of this is one is definitions. And the one that triggered this was one of your write-ups talked about, should we prioritize around retaining our best customers, which just begs a really big question. What is a big customer defined by? Right. So there's the vocabulary. And then the other thing I think people try to avoid is forced prioritization. I mean, if you are making a decision on a feature A or B, you have got to have some prioritization on those attributes that you value that's going to decide whether you could put A first or B first. And I think people really have a hard time forcing themselves to say, hey, you have to prioritize these attributes because you can't satisfy them all. How can we take some of those lessons in terms of your projects and apply them on maybe a more broad application?
Well, if we think about how the AI utility function works, right, the variables and metrics around which the AI model is going to try to optimize, the definition of the weights, right, and how we define the weights is everything. Now, the model is going to continuously learn and adapt. It's going to modify weights based on what the desired outcomes were and what the actual outcomes were, right? They're going to predict, they're going to measure, you're going to use back propagation and stochastic gradient descent to kind of continuously modify your AI utility function. But you have to look at bringing into your model, AI utility function, variables that conflict, right? Because if you don't, this AI model is going to find that one optimization gap, and it's going to drill down and auger right into the ground with it. So we have to put in things like, well, we need to be able to improve healthcare and economic growth. It isn't healthcare or economic growth. It has to be both. Most of the decisions that we make as humans, are all based on trade-offs. We want to go decide where to go eat. Well, I want to go here, but the kids want to go here, and I only have money for this. And think of all the variables you go through to decide, well, where are we going to go eat tonight, if we go at all? So we have to, as you said, you have to prioritize, but think more of as weights. That I'm going to give this a slightly higher weight than this, but the model is going to eventually change based on how you define your desired outcomes. What does it want to achieve? What are the KPIs and metrics against which I'm going to measure success? And then it's going to constantly look at, say, well, I thought this was I made this prediction. The actual was this. I'm going to tweak. It's constantly, because the model is never right. Somebody described it as Denny the dumb torpedo, right? Or the dumb missile. It's going towards a target. It's saying not on target, not on target. And it's always adjusting itself for the wind and everything else, not on target. It's not on target until it hits the target. And that's kind of what's happening here. These models are going to constantly have to mix and match and change. The only difference between the dummy missile is that the target's constantly moving. Right? It isn't like the target's there.
Right.
As soon as you think you have it's constantly moving. So as a group, going through a process to not only identify the variables and metrics against which all the different stakeholders are trying to measure their desired effectiveness of their desired outcomes, but having a process, like saying, prioritizing and weighting, well, which ones are most important? That is where the human comes in, right? That's where humans have to play that role. It can't be the AI models that decide the weights. We'll end up with Terminators. It has to be on us.
I don't like to talk about temporal things. Chat GPT-4 came out, and they're already saying it's, screamingly better than Chat yesterday, which just reinforces the concept of of exponential curves, right? Which people can't grok in the speed in which this stuff is really taking off, and that we've got to have people that are, constantly measuring, like say, against the KPIs. Is this what we want? And you've talked about kind of input data versus output data, and really focusing on those input data pieces to make sure that it's driving to the output stuff that you're hoping to get at the end.
It's almost easier to start with the outputs. What are the desired outcomes? How are you going to measure success across all the stakeholders? And then backing into the inputs, which is almost kind of like feature engineering. What are the features I need to have in my model in order to achieve those outcomes and achieve those KPIs? So it's almost easier to think backwards forward than it is to go, these are the features, and then I hope I can get those kind of desired results.
Right.
Because the hope is only a strategy in the cosmetics industry. So
I love that you used that in one of your other shows. My boss used to say that all the time. Hope is not a strategy. It's like, okay. Well, but I am curious, with all the shows that you've been on, you've been on a boatload of podcasts. What's kind of your global takeaway from the depth of those conversations, the breadth of those conversations, the level of curiosity, the level of kind of hearing what you're saying? Because and congratulations. You're doing a boatload of podcasts these days.
Thanks. I think there's a shift underway. I think there is growing awareness. The level of questions that I get, I think, are more humanistic, more holistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm encouraged. I also do lots of lectures, and I like doing lectures to universities because I love to see the kinds of questions that the students ask, and because that tells me a lot about what's on their mind and maybe what I need to start explaining better in my presentations. And overall, I think there is a growing awareness of that, and maybe this is because I see things through rose-colored glasses, is I think the conversations really are more about economics than technology. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is that when we start thinking about data and analytics from an economics perspective, we're going to get into a value conversation, because economics is about value creation and distribution. It's about value. And we start having that conversation about value, I think more and more people feel empowered. They can have a voice. They can understand that. Versus talking about data and things like data governance and data management, things that make people sort of fall asleep, and or the analytics stuff, which is, like you mentioned right at the beginning, is mathematically, like the mathematics behind Chat GPT is stunning. It's absolutely stunning what they can do. But that stunning mathematics doesn't mean anything if we can't translate math models into economic models. And so the idea that we at the end of the day, these technologies are here to serve us, not here to manage us.
Right.
And so really, I'm starting to see more and more people getting more comfortable with the idea that a generative AI capability, how does that sit? I got a whole toolbox of tools I have. Which are the right tools to use in what situation? Now, I rely very heavily on the data science team to tell me that this is the best tool like this. And I'm not going to challenge them, I'm not going to credit them, but here's the outcome I'm seeking. Here's the KPIs and metrics. You tell me what are the right set of tools to go after that. And by the way, there is no one tool. It's typically a combination of different kinds of algorithms we're bringing together. They're slicing together, they're supply chaining them together, whatever, right? So I do think there is a growing awareness and a growing empowerment among students who think about, yes, AI is a tool and here's how I can use it. Now, there's a gap between the people who are been in the marketplace or the workforce for a long time who don't have maybe the kinds of training or awareness. And then there's a gap people below them who, I'm not talking about grade school students, so I do think teaching data literacy in grade school is probably a pretty good idea. So we're doing a great job at the college student level, we've got to find a way to trickle that down to, I think, lower grade students. We got to find a way to upgrade everybody in the across the country. Everybody's impacted by this, as you said earlier, right? If you use a GPS system, baby, you're using AI.
Right. Well, it's a couple things you trigger there. One is you talk a lot about economics being the kind of creation and management of value. The other thing that I remember from my economics classes is economics about scarcity, right? And that's what drives supply demand curves and all these other curves, right? There was always this trade off, and data has fundamentally changed that game in a huge way. And I know we've talked about valuation on balance sheets before, and the fact that they don't get it, and you don't destroy it, and you can use it infinite times, and blah 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 blah. I mean, it's completely different. What I think is interesting about the Chat GPT, right, where the big potential is the democratization of now access to the tools to people, to your point, that haven't been trained, but have the questions and have the curiosity and kind of know where to go. Now they have a new tool that's a little bit more powerful than their calculator to apply. And that's where it gets exciting, right? Because that's when innovation happens, when more people have access to the tools.
So I'm sure you've read the Kissinger, Eric Schmidt piece in the Wall Street Journal, where they talk about their concern with Chat GPT is a disconnect between knowledge and understanding. That people all of a sudden have knowledge, but they haven't earned it. There's actually a great quote. I can't give it to you. It's in my latest blog from the movie Jurassic Park, and Jeff Goldblum talks about.
I've seen that one. I've seen that one referenced.
Yeah. So this knowledge is not understanding, and I think what I find really game changing about Chat GPT is I think it's going to transform how we value education and how we value people. That people who just memorize and regurgitate knowledge aren't nearly as important as people who know how to apply knowledge. And we're going to get into an age where application is more important than regurgitation, which, by the way, I think has fundamental ripples through our education system.
Right.
Because we have education that teaches memorization. So there's this knowledge versus understanding challenge right in front of us that Chat GPT just laid right in front of us, and one is not the other. So I think there's going to be ramifications that are going to benefit people who really think about, how do I apply these technologies from an economics perspective? I keep coming back to economics, but I want to go on a really interesting point you raised around scarcity. Do you mind if I go back there for a second?
Not at all.
So I agree with you that scarcity of data is not there, right? It's readily available, can reuse, blah, blah, blah. But what about the insights? What about the scarcity of these codified insights? Think about them as scores. That's not really a scarcity. That's actually if I can build a better credit risk model than the person over here, that gives me an unfair advantage in trying to figure out who gets loans, what kind of terms they get, what kind of rates they get. That's not an abundance thing. That's total scarcity.
Right.
And so while data itself is a very abundant asset, everybody's got it. It's not the data that's really interesting. It's those predicted behavioral performance insights, those predicted behavioral performance propensities that are about what customers are likely to do in what situations. That is very rare and worth a lot of value, in my opinion.
Well, it's always application, right? I mean, oil in the ground is oil in the ground until you use it to do something with it. So
yes,
but I think what's very different is the oil in the ground can only be used once, and that's right.
Yep.
Obviously, where the data is significantly different. So let's talk a little bit about education. Because, there was another article that got a lot of buzz, right? It was the Wharton professor that basically told his students that you need to use generative AI tools in the completion of these courses to force them to use the tool, just like we used to use calculators. Or we still, I don't know, I don't have calculators in my phone now, like everything else is in my phone. But really to more, very good. It's not an HP something or something, though. Come on.
It's a Casio. It's cost me the reason why I have this here, because it cost me $1.99.
Right.
And my point behind this is, if my career, my job was based on calculation of square root, this thing just replaced me.
Well, it's also interesting because the HPs that originally came out that did the complicated stuff were hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and it was Casio and the cheap ones that suddenly everybody had a basic little calculator that could do square roots and stuff. And
yeah,
I think the the scary part about people maybe not being qualified to have the tools is so overbalanced by the opportunity, for the democratization, because a lot more of the people that do are going to do it for good things and discover new things. It's just a very different way to have access to this information. And it's funny, the educations, they were built under a system where all the knowledge could be in one place. I mean, like literally all the knowledge about a topic and all the people that knew everything about it could literally be in one building, right?
Yeah.
So that's a model that's not
it is, there. Yeah, it is a real interesting education ramification. I actually ask my students to use ChatGPT when we do our thinking like a data scientist process, because they're researching companies around which they're going to try to build, these analytic models for, and we got to understand what their business initiatives are and who their stakeholders are. And if you're asking ChatGPT, hey, John Deere, what are their top business initiatives? Let ChatGPT tell you. Now, what I also say is find out the sources. I ask ChatGPT, where are the sources for this? Because I want to make certain that that the sources are something credible, the Wall Street Journal or Barron's, or not from some wackadoodle that sits in the middle of nowhere dreaming up crap. So you really have to instill critical thinking,
right,
in people who are using ChatGPT, and that's a good thing to have. But we shouldn't shy away from using it. We shouldn't ban it.
Right.
That's a great way to guarantee it's going to be used inappropriately. Right. Let's make sure we teach them how to use it effectively.
So I'm curious with your kids now, because your college kids that you teach, a lot of them now have grown up in the time of having a mobile device with access to information at their fingertips. How have you seen that manifest itself in your conversations with them in terms of their critical thinking or their use of data, or do they drop references that they looked up, or they feel confidence in? I mean, how has, it's so different. We spend a lot of time in the library looking up data and writing reports and putting references and links. In fact, I used to go to UCLA. They had the best library because they had every single book in the psychology that ever been written. What do you take from them? I know you love them, and I know you learn a lot from them. What's some of the things you come back and tell Caroline about when you get home from class?
Usually I'm exhausted. 3.5 hour class on a Thursday night. I'm exhausted. But what I see is that there's a tendency to take at face value whatever it comes up. So you ask it a question, and it gives you an answer, and you think it comes from Walter Cronkite, so you believe it. This is why I say, tell me the sources, check a reasonable test, give me something to peer review it, so to speak, find other 2 or 3 sources that confirm what you find. So I love ChatGPT because it gives you a hint as far as where to start. It's almost never 100%, well, it probably can be, but inside the kind of question we use, it's only giving you a hint. And then from there, you have to use your own judgment, your own experience, and more research to figure out, well, tell me more about this. Let's research it further. But it helps to jumpstart a lot of conversations that then they have to apply critical thinking skills to think, what are the key business initiatives? Who are the stakeholders? What are the ramifications? So I see that they are eager to use these tools. They're not as scared of anything. But if we don't give them a framework around which to think about how to use this, if we don't teach, for example, critical thinking, which we really need to start instilling critical thinking at an early age, so people, they hear something, they go, that sounds reasonable. Let me check the source.
Right.
Let me double check that.
Yeah.
Just basic stuff.
The trust is interesting. And, Edelman does a big paper on trust every year. They've done a longitudinal thing for years and years. And what's the thing about trust, just to pick on Tesla for a minute, is, people climb in the back of their Tesla and take a nap while it's going down the freeway at 60 miles an hour. So what I think is interesting is this kind of inherent trust that technology is going to work. And maybe it's because it has worked so well most of the time. I mean, people don't even understand the magic behind a cell phone call from either a remote location or like in the middle of a conference floor with all those people and just what is going on in the background. So they trust it inherently, even though maybe they don't trust the company or they don't trust the people who are taking care of their data. But it's this weird kind of presumption that, if it says self-driving, I'm just going to hit self-driving and take a nap.
Yeah. Trust is an interesting thing. And we've seen this way back early days when people would take spreadsheets and they would they would change the numbers and then present them. It's like, oh, it's in a spreadsheet. It's got to be right.
Right.
What? Show me the source of that data. It's interesting that and I don't have an answer on this, Jeff, but there does seem to be one needs to understand the criticality of the decisions you're making, the costs of being wrong, in order to figure out, is it worth trusting the data or not? Now, I don't have a Tesla, but I don't think I would let it drive by itself, because the cost of being wrong, I'm going to die, or I'm going to kill other people.
Right.
So to me, there needs to be a process around how do you make an informed decision. And we could go rat hole on the whole COVID vaccination stuff. How there was evidence out there that certain people were dying from this thing, and certain types of people, and yet people didn't think clearly about what data they didn't have a decision framework for making a decision. They turned to whatever their favorite TV, radio, print thing was, and whatever that random person said is what I'm going to believe. So we have, as a society, a real challenge with trust. And we don't know, get back to this, we don't know how to think critically. We don't know how to challenge authority. Maybe coming up I wasn't a child of the 60s, but I was close, right? And, don't trust anybody over 35. And my answer would be, don't trust anybody who's got a podcast, right? Or a blog. Double check it.
Right.
Right? Isn't they lying all the time, but I'm just going to make sure that they don't represent one view. So anyway.
No, but I think it's interesting, right? Because it was, right? That's the nature of college kids. They're supposed to be cynical, right? They're supposed to be challenging the status quo. They're supposed to be thinking about things differently. And yet sometimes if it comes through, maybe it's a function of the vehicle, it comes through the phone or whatever. Oh, this must be true. And it's interesting where we choose to just accept and where we choose to challenge. And I would imagine critical thinking is going to be a huge part of your thing.
But Jeff, we don't teach decision making. We don't teach anybody. We don't teach problem solving at any really young age. We don't teach decision making, how to make informed decisions. We don't teach that.
All right, well, I want to shift gears a little bit, and it's really in regards to communication and community. You have really, you've been a speaker forever. You've been teaching for a long time. You've written lots of books. But in the last couple of years, you've really increased your presence on LinkedIn. And not to pick on LinkedIn, but I know you spend a lot of time there, and you post almost every single day, if I'm not wrong, pretty close. I'm just curious in terms of your experience, in terms of community and real community, and what that feels like, and what it smells like, and what it tastes like, and then engagement, and how that world both contributes to you and what you're trying to do professionally, what you're trying to do academically, and then what you're trying to do because you're Bill Schmarzo and you care about people.
So I find that I'm very lucky in the sense that there's a lot of really, really super smart people who follow and engage with me, people with a wide range of experiences and wide range of expertise. And when I post something, my job is to nurture a conversation. I don't try to shut people off. I'm still learning this stuff. So people who have different perspectives to me is very important. And I find that, 99.5% of the people I engage with are very productive. They're trying to share ideas. There's this sense of we're all learning together, #BetterTogether kind of stuff. Right. So, maybe because of what I've been doing, I've got a really community of folks who are brilliant and share stuff, and everybody has a voice, and I try to encourage it. And every now and then you get somebody who's kind of cynical, and I find that the best thing to do is to ignore them, right? I don't want anybody to block them. I don't want to cancel anybody, because you never know where the best ideas might come, because I certainly don't have them. And so I like to encourage conversation. I post a lot. My blogs are long. I think it's really hard. The intention of my blogs is I give them to my college students to read. I want them, it's like a homework assignment. So, they're 4 or 5 pages. It's, that's Schmarzo, right? It's dry as hell. I mean, come on. So
dense.
The fact that people are willing to read this and then add to it, I am so grateful. I'm so lucky they're willing to contribute. And then that the community sort of just builds very quickly, and then people throwing more ideas out there. So, it isn't anything that I did on purpose. It just sort of, the community evolved because people wanted to have a voice. They wanted to feel like they had a place they could share ideas. They wanted to have a place where they could have constructive debate, where somebody who had a different view could come out and say, no, I see it this way. And not have somebody say, well, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah. But you could say, well, tell me more about your rationale. So
Yeah.
Jeff, I've been lucky.
Yeah, but you're not all lucky. I mean, you help shape it. You put the catalyst out there. You put some thoughtful research behind it, and you put in and you share all these great frameworks, right? For people, like I said, a lot of times it's just frameworks. People need frameworks. It's just like, tell me how to do it, and I'm happy to do it. I just don't know where to get started, or I don't know how to prioritize, or I don't know how to do which thing first.
That may be my one superpower, Jeff, is maybe I do think frameworks. I'm just a framework kind of guy. I'm always, to me, if I can't implement what I'm writing about, then don't bother writing about it. So I'm a very pragmatic, maybe that's the Iowa kid in me.
Right.
I want to make sure that it can be applied. It's which is why this, the economics of ethics, I created that template. So, okay, let's try using this.
Right.
I don't feel it. I mean, change it, modify it, tear it apart, make it better. But the bottom line is make it better.
Right.
So maybe that's part of it.
Well, let me get you on one of those real specifics, and that's your favorite thing. You love to talk about customer journey, which took us on a Captain Crunch journey last time we spoke. But, I had Martina Lachenko on from Coast No Venture. She just wrote a book called Loved, product marketing book. And her data point that I want to share with you is 70% of the buying decision now for most people's buying journey, depending on who you listen to, is done before they get to your front door. So, the data collection, the analysis, the maybe sampling some stuff, talking to some friends, reading some reviews, not only on the product and the application, but also the company. And maybe I'm checking, the employee's happy. The variability in the customer journey is increasing also dramatically. I know that's a huge part of when you're doing your exercises and trying to really hone in on the value and where you can make improvements in the process. How do you kind of square that circle of this crazy variability? And now there's so much information sources from a customer informing point of view, right? There's so many more places for them to go to get information, some which you control, many that you don't.
Well, what I love about the journey map is the first step in the process is awareness. So if you're a theme park, and you're trying to, get customers to come to your theme park, like you said, by the time they come to your theme park, they're making decisions before you ever talk to them. And so how do you impact awareness? It is an awareness and accessibility issue in many cases, which is why I love the very first part of that journey map is, customer has an intent, right? The customer, if you can understand the customer intent, then you have a chance to influence their awareness and direct them your direction. But if you don't understand their intent, you'll have no opportunity to manage, monitor, and optimize what they're trying to do. And so we don't spend enough time trying to understand, well, what is our customer trying to do? They want to go on vacation. Okay, that's a great start. But think about the number of options. Yosemite, right? You got that. You go to a baseball game or a basketball game or to a beach somewhere. There's just almost an endless number of options if I want to go on vacation. So how do you make sure you understand the customer's intentions, what their desired outcomes are? So I even know whether that's someone I can, if they want to go to if I'm a theme park and they want to go to the beach, well, I guess some theme parks I could probably do that. But, if they want to go to a baseball game, they're not coming to my theme park, right? It's just, so the journey map's a very powerful tool because it forces you to really start with the customer and their intent in mind, their desired outcomes, and how they're going to measure success. And when you do that, that journey map becomes just this golden vehicle for helping you to make certain you understand, what am I doing to make certain that customer has the right experience? What am I doing to make sure I have all the right componentry and all the other things? It just drives everything. And, oh, by the way, it isn't just a customer who has a journey map. If you're in a theme park, your technicians have a journey map. Your operators have a journey map. There's all kinds of other people who have journey maps along that process. And mapping those journey maps and finding those linkage points between those maps those are force multipliers. So that's where things get very interesting.
Right. I can't help but think as you're talking about that, and we talked about education in terms of should we be done with average? Should we take average out of all the books
God,
now
yes.
and just go with
Yes.
confidence, confidence levels with a range, and I don't know, maybe really focus on, more meaningful things than average? It's just like, yeah, if we haven't moved past the age of average now, we never have.
Well, great point, right? Average. Well, first off, no one's average.
Right.
Right. There's no one who's actual average. So if you're trying to serve average, you're actually serving nobody. But like you said, the average, if you look at variances, right, and standard deviations, you have to think, you have to train on some really fundamental leverage of statistics. So that, if my shooting average is, for 3-point range is 41%, that's great. My variability is between 40 and 42. That's even better. If it's between 20 and 60, it's like yikes.
That's the plan,
right? So, yeah. So you got to understand the variations in there. Average doesn't mean anything if you don't understand variation. And I do think if you make decisions based on averages, at best, you're going to get average results.
Right. And to your point, it's always about trying to increase the probability of the relationship of these things, that if we do this, they're going to do that, but it's not necessarily ever a direct connection. It's all at the end of the day probabilities and confidence levels.
Bingo. It's probabilities and confidence level. That's what we should be teaching, that so people think about, what's a probability this customer is going to do this? And that gets back to understanding, if I'm building probabilities into my models, what are the costs of the false positive and false negatives? Do I understand what it costs to be wrong? Is that probability sufficient, or do I need to figure out a way to improve my probability before I make that decision? So I do think probabilities and confidence levels are a much better way to train our thinkers, our students, than average, which doesn't mean anything.
Right. Even just adding mode and median to the, I've got average in most of my spreadsheets, right? But now I'm adding mode and median, just those two simple things. I should probably add standard deviation. Add so much more information. It costs so much more information to a set of data as you start to have more of these indicators, these windows.
And if your goal is to make more informed decisions, you should know that your standard deviation to figure out, if I'm going to make that decision, here's where it sits on this, 95% confidence, 98%, right? What those levels are. So again, it's probabilities and confidence levels, so you can make more informed decisions.
All right, Bill. Well, it's always fantastic to catch up, and congrats on the move and things like you're settling in very well, and you spending lots of time with all the kids at school, and God, it's podcast. You got to update your own podcast, your own website though, so that you've got the laundry list of podcasts you've been on, so I could find them easier for my research.
Yeah, well, my daughter does that, and she's busy finishing grad school and got a job, so Pops has fallen down on the pecking order for doing my stuff for me.
All right. Well, thanks again, Bill. It's always a treat, and great to catch up.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. He's Bill. I'm Jeff. You're watching Turn the Lens with Jeff Frick. Thanks for watching and listening on the podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Awesome.
Fun. Yeah, we'll see how those picks do, huh? UConn I have going a lot further than most people. I think UConn is a sleeper, and